Serious, when was a time you interacted with a seemingly normal person, but later found out that they were not? I worked at Circuit City as a teenager and was helping someone looking at TVs. My boss called me over and said he needed me up front to help at checkout. Thought it was weird because there wasn't a line. But whatever. Turns out the guy I was helping was Drew Peterson, who has since been convicted of murder. This was back when he was just a suspect. But my boss recognized him from the news and didn't want to compromise my safety. Worked with a woman for 2 years at a child-related business. Perfectly normal mother type with multiple children. While we worked together, she was on vacation. Took her youngest child, 2yo, out on a hike and stabbed him in the chest with a chef's knife. She then called 911 and frantically reported they had been mugged. The police knew something was up because she also said nothing had been taken. Child miraculously survived. And it came out later that an affair she was having had been exposed that night before the stabbing. Turns out the child was a product of the affair. Talk about misplaced blame. Edit, I should have added she was convicted. Spent 10 years in prison, no parole. And was released after the full 10. She has since passed away, within a year of her release. I don't know her cause of death. Back in the late 90s. I had a friend from work whose brother hung out with us a few times when we'd go out. He seemed normal. A few years later, he allegedly, his family maintains he's innocent, set off a couple of bombs at biotech companies as part of some extreme animal rights group he'd gotten mixed up in. He managed to evade the FBI and disappeared. It being shortly after 9/11. The FBI put him in their top 10 for a while and America's Most Wanted did a profile on him. As far as I know, he's never been caught. I've seen his picture a couple of times in movies when some cop is searching a database of suspects and it's always a weird blast from the past moment. I was in a reenactment group when I was younger. Along with my family and others. 2 of the dads were like the head honchos, running the show. And they did it wonderfully. We were a part of this group for years. Then come to find out that one of those head honchos had been sexually abusing his daughter since she was 7. She was 15 when it came out. He only did 3 years. Many years ago I lived in Cancun and met a very charming man who ended up dating one of my friends. We would go out in his car to go to the beach. Out for dinner and whatnot. My kids would even come along once in a while. He was always in a good mood. All smiles. Though later I discovered his father had been kidnapped and never found. One day he told us he was sure he was going to end up being kidnapped too. Probably tortured and killed. I never understood what was going on. I moved back to my hometown and some months later I saw in the newspaper that 3 tortured bodies had been found on the side of the road from Cancun to Merida. One was my friend and I was in complete shock when I found out who he was. I could not believe it. He was a big hitman from the Zeta Cartel. Was involved in all sorts of criminal activity including trafficking of children. He was the bodyguard of a very known child predator and CP producer in Cancun. I cannot stop thinking how I could have been kidnapped along with this man just like the other 2 were just for being there at the wrong time. My children were in danger and I didn't even know. It is scary AF. We had a friend of the family that would always talk to us about going to his summer camp. Cool guy. The only thing was my dad did not like to send us away on summer and would rather have us work with him at his store. Turns out the guy was a pedo and would molest and take pics of the camp kids. I chatted with a random guy in the laundry room of our apartment complex. He was nice. Friendly. Outgoing kind of fellow. Skinny thing. A few weeks later I ran into him and his girlfriend on the elevator. I said, "Hey Mike. How's it going?" He proceeded to tell me how it was not going well for him. He'd been evicted from our apartment complex because he had like 8 people living with him. Had been stabbed while he was on the bus coming home from an AA meeting. Was recovering from the stab wound when his girlfriend, the one who was with him in the elevator at that very moment, Broke up with him. His side piece was pregnant and the bitch in the front office wanted him to turn in his key ASAP. I was just kind of like cool. Well, see you around. I was flying freight to an island in the Caribbean. One day I landed and began to rush to unload the plane due to a storm being quite visible on the horizon. A man was standing next to the runway, casually watching and nothing else until I tripped and almost fell. He laughed. My response was to throw the box I was carrying at him and yell that if he was going to just stand there like a useless lump, that I was going to put his to work. He looked surprised, then actually did begin to help unload the plane, and I left without even knowing his name. I was in light end several days later when I came again. That man was the millionaire who owned a neighboring island that they worked on. I had thrown a box at David Copperfield. I worked with a guy that was later found guilty of murder by intentionally leaving his toddler in a hot car. My ex-wife and I even had dinner with him and his wife. Everything seemed completely normal. Edit, spell check. Knew a kid in high school who was nice to me, and so I would hang out with him from time to time. He was always getting into trouble though, and I finally stopped hanging out with him after he brought a knife to school. Fast forward 5 years. He is now in prison for shooting a man to death over a pound of weed. Met a random elder gentleman while walking back to my car after a night out. The guy was dressed in khakis and a college sweatshirt and looked harmless. He asked for a few bucks and informed me that he was new to the area and down on his luck. Turned out that the Illinois Department of Corrections had given him a one-way bus ticket to Atlanta. He had just finished a plus 20-year sentence for murdering his ex-wife and her lover. He was trying to reconnect with his daughter, who he hadn't seen since she was a little kid. My 18-year-old daughter dated this guy for about 5 months. She told me he was a little weird at times. I just thought he was super shy. He called me mom. He would play video games with my son. They moved in together and he changed from being a hard worker to not going to work and expecting her to provide financially and do all the chores. She went out of town and came back to find he hadn't taken good care of her dog. She broke up with him. The next day he killed her. I was in total shock. I didn't believe he could do something so terrible. I even went and saw him when he turned himself in 2 days later. To hear it from him. He did it. He didn't seem to have guilt. Now he stares at me in court. He smirks. He laughs. He was given a plea agreement and will be sentenced on the 23rd of March. He will only get 16 to 25 years. It's not fair. Finding my daughter's murdered body and hearing him say he was the one who did that to her showed me even the most normal seeming person may not be normal at all. I went night fishing. Started chatting with the guy in the swim next to me and cooked some BBQ, had a beer and a normal chat. As the night drew on, he pulled out a pipe and started smoking some crack and banging on about how the earth was flat. It was quite a long night and I didn't even catch a fish. I worked with a guy like 15 years ago. Seemed like a smart, funny guy. We never hung out or anything, but we were friendly at work. About 10 years ago he went to his ex-wife's house and killed her. Then himself. His kids were in the house. Back in like 2005/6. In my early days of music I was on tour in the US. I was about 18/19 and at that time I was in a band that didn't make any money, so naturally we slept on floors and such after shows. We played a Midwestern city that we did really well in. Had a lot of friends in the area and whatnot. Next show was only 2 hours away, so we stay with a kid from the show that was a fan. I end up going off and spending most of the night with a girl I'd end up dating, but returned back pretty late. Next day, kid decides he wants to go to the show 2 hours away. He liked smoking pot and so did I, so me and one other of our guys just rode with him to the show so we could smoke weed. Anyways, fast forward like 3 or 4 days later and we get a call from someone in that city letting us know the kid had been arrested. Charged with murdering his dad and keeping him in the deep freeze of his house. The house we stayed in. The body was in there while we were there. It was crazy because he seemed like a normal dude. Nothing off about him. Apparently his father was very abusive and there's a lot of nuances in the story. But either way, he still killed his dad with an axe. Edit, RIP my inbox that guy's dad. I went to a family gathering with my wife at the time that included a brother of hers that was rarely around. He was something of the black sheep of the family. It was my first time meeting him. He was nice. We played some volleyball in the pool. Chatted. Had a few beers. It was a great day. Found out the following week that he was wanted by the police at the time of the party for abducting and murdering his ex-girlfriend. He is currently in prison for the rest of his life. That was surreal as poop to discover. Was given a new employee to manage. Normal guy. Full stop. Full stop. Until a few weeks later I see him shoving toothpicks under his fingernails. Deeper and deeper. 5 at a time. I asked him what was up with that and he just said it makes me feel better. Relaxed. Got to know him more and more. Turns out he was in and out of some mental institutions. All self-admitted. No idea what his inner demons were though. Same job. Another employee. Dude seemed nice enough. Turns out he had served some time for manslaughter. His story is that he was caught sleeping with a married woman and killed the husband in self-defense. A jury didn't see it that way. After working for about a month he stole a coworker's iPod and never came back. A few days later someone robbed and killed him outside of a bar about a mile from work. There was a guy in my Sunday school classes who seemed normal. Even somewhat interesting company. Then one night all the students and their parents were called to the church and we learned that guy was a serial rapist. His attendance in Sunday school was part of a long con to groom a girl as his next victim. When I was 14 dealing with anorexia, I had to get my blood drawn. While he was drawing my blood he was kinda feeling my boobs. Telling me it helps with the blood flow. A year later he got arrested for feeling other girls and telling them the same thing. He ended up getting 19 years. Still have a fear of a man touching me when I got either doctors. Edit, wow wasn't expecting this to blow up. Thanks for all the nice messages. I've been to many mental hospitals and there's always someone that makes you wonder why are they here? And then they do or say something and you're just like oh. That's why. Woman I worked with was an emotion vampire. Kept asking me about the baby I lost just to see me cry about it. Finally got to a point where I could give her non-answers while showing no emotion and surprise. Guess what's no longer interesting to talk about? She also kept asking me about my brother I never talked to no matter how many times I told her she'd seen him more recently than me. She was in her 80s and still working at the time but she stopped working around the time I had my almost 3 years so she's probably dead now. I was going to pay for petrol. And an older woman was going to reach the counter at the same time as me. I gestured for her to go first and smiled. She smiled back and paid for her things. As soon as she was done she turned around and started to scream about me being foreign and taking good jobs. She continues to call me a beast and all sorts of bizarre insults. I realize this woman is obviously troubled and just smile and pay for my things. She keeps going till I'm out of earshot and dear god I should have just paid first. Worked with a guy for almost a year. Then met him at an AA meeting by chance. We both had a couple of years in recovery. We hired a new girl at work. I had a job where you could work and chat at the same time. So we got to know each other quickly. She was nice and everything. But I was really put off by her endless poop stories. She used to drive long distances for work and poop in a bucket in her car. She once pooped in a plastic bag and kept it in her pocket. The list goes on and on. Nobody wants to know but she just can't stop. Edit, just adding another story she told me. Apparently the bucket tipped over once. And she said the smell never truly went away even after getting her car professionally cleaned. She also pissed in empty water bottles while driving at the same time. And if she ever cut the cheese at work, she would announce to the entire team, "Hey guys, I just farted. We worked in a packaging facility for food products. Lived on a farm. I lived in the farmhouse as a lodger and worked as a chef. Every night in the summer when the farm had immigrant workers, I went to their party. About 20-30 young Lithuanians. Great parties, although very drunken. One guy just kind of hooked onto me. I can't explain it any other way except where I went he followed. I bought cigarettes of him sometimes when it was late. Shared drinks. I thought he was just another guy. Unnatural socially, but we're all that way sometimes. He always wore the same t-shirt, which couldn't have got washed much. Read smile if you aren't wearing any panties. I don't mean he mostly wore that shirt. He always wore that shirt. He always had this big grin that was unnerving. Wide eyes, and they would just focus on you and he wouldn't move. In retrospect, I see now most people gave him a wide berth, but I never saw that at the time. Lithuanian Vody will do that. Anyway, summer became autumn. I stopped going every day for parties and so stopped bumping into him. Last I heard was that he had been throwing rocks up at my window shouting for me. Had said some very weird poop to the girls on the site, and the owner had fired him and called police to have him arrested and taken away.
Hi there. Look, if you enjoyed the video, well, why not go ahead and hit that like and subscribe to Reddit Stories. In fact, if you want to see even more responses to this thread, well then, take a look. There's the link in the description below. And remember, show some love to those authors while you're there. And I look forward to seeing you next time.